Well, hello again, HR Tech Groovers. It's been a couple of weeks since we caught up. But goodness me, we had some really good engagement on our last post, didn't we?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's been amazing, some of the feedback that we've got.
Yeah, it was terrific to see, and thank you for all of our new followers who've liked the post, shared the post, and hopefully many of you are continuing to follow the many topics that we'll talk about in all things HR technology. Sambit Jane and I were having a chat the other day. We saw an article that must have appeared on both of our respective LinkedIn feeds, and it was around unconscious bias, in particular in the COVID-19 era. And I think, look, how are you guys all coping with lockdown at the moment?
Yeah, hanging in there.
You hanging in there, Jane? You going okay?
Yeah, just waiting for those hairdressers to open back up.
Me too. I know it's a bit of the struggle's real, but look, hopefully, and for those of you who aren't aware, we're all based in Melbourne, and there are some fairly tight restrictions at the moment, but we're looking forward to some good news, hopefully on Sunday, around what will change. So anyway, back to the sort of that piece, and so Sam, but we were sort of thinking. Given that sort of unconscious bias and given your expertise, we thought it actually might be a really good topic of conversation for us to have a bit of a chat about, because I guess when it comes to HR technology and bias, there's some really good tools out there in this space that can supplement the recruitment process.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Josh. I think there's some really exciting technology in this space. I know personally, being a job seeker through this COVID period, how kind of hard it's been. And I would take some comfort knowing that I'm on a level playing field to the rest of the applicants through the selection process, interview process, etc. For that, I think it's really, I guess, important for companies to understand where their bias is actually in their process, and how they're actually going to address it. So, whether it be a process change, a piece of technology, or maybe both of those things.
Absolutely, Jane. And I think, Sam, that you've obviously done some really great work in the recruitment bias and machine learning space. We were having a bit of a read of some of your pieces, and I thought it might be great if we could discuss some of your high-level findings when it came to the prevalence of bias in recruitment processes, if that was okay.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. It's great to be back with both of you. Yes, I indeed worked on the recruitment bias using HR analytics, and it was really fascinating study. I learned a lot, and in my experimental study, I used a synthetic data set. So, just a disclaimer: it was not a real company data set. And the key objectives of my work was to investigate the shortlisting stage in the recruitment process, and I specifically wanted to check if gender and ethnicity had any influence on the applicant shortlisting process. And using the data, I also applied machine learning to predict who will be then shortlisted. And then finally, I came up with some hiring strategies based on the findings that I had. And yeah, using the data, I could see that we did have gender and ethnicity bias in the shortlisting stage, and in another interesting research work, I also found that a company, and this is a real story. There's a company in US who actually did a similar study, and they found out that when the applicant's nationality matched with the recruiter's nationality, the chances of the shortlisting increased significantly, and that was hidden in the data. And and they, when they found that, they of course they went into and took some steps to offset that bias. And in general, in my study, I to I recommended that in order to offset the bias, I wrote about introducing a blind review process where you could have applicants' name, gender, and ethnic background information hidden from the internal or external recruiter while reviewing the job application process. However, again, as a data scientist, I would add a disclaimer that before a company could take such a step, they should just also carefully look at the data and then make that informed decision whether they would like to go or introduce a blind review process. Josh.
That's so interesting, Sam. But and I know you used an experimental set of data, but I do wonder how far from the truth that would be in a normal setting, to be honest. I think I think a lot of companies would be quite surprised, I think, at what they would actually find if they did the same kind of experiment that you did with their real data. So I guess for companies that are wanting to look at, where their bias may lay, what, I guess, tips would you have on where to start?
Yeah, that's a good one, Jane. I think from analytics point of view, we always suggest that organizations should start with a business problem rather than diving into the data and trying to make sense of it. You should actually start with the business problem. And in my case study, my business problem was to find out whether bias existed in the shortlisting stage of a company's recruitment process. And then using that business problem, we develop a hypothesis where we assume initially that there is no bias on the data on the recruitment process, and that's the hypothesis we would like to then disprove in our work. And that's when the data comes in. And the data could be in different environments. It could be in a system, but there would be also companies who would not have a system, and they would be capturing that data in an Excel, or maybe even in papers. So the data set that I used was a very straightforward, simple one, Jane. And I just used three fields. For example, the list of applicants, the gender of the applicant, and the ethnicity data. So whether the applicant was a general candidate, or the person was had an aboriginal background, for example. And the last one was whether the person was shortlisted, yes or no. And using that information, I could then review the shortlisting stage to understand whether there was any bias. And you could then pick up this study and apply it on another stage in the recruitment process. For example, you want to check whether bias exists in the offer stage or in the interview stage. So then you can just add more fields and say offered to that applicant, yes or no, and interviewed, yes or no. So then you can then expand your study further.
Really love seeing some of the passion coming through here, Sam, because I know it's something that you really love to do. I think there were some really great tips in there. And I think really around your point of looking at the business problem, I think that really helps focus your attention, because I know when you can have some big data sets, it could be potentially overwhelming if you're not sure, I guess, what you're trying to solve for. So we've talked a lot
Yeah.
about recruitment bias. Are there any other, I guess, parts of the employee life cycle once someone's been hired that bias could potentially creep into?
That's a great question, Jen. Generally, my study and research has led to my understanding, Jen, that recruitment and onboarding process has impacts on broader areas of the HR processes. So I'll just call out three case studies that come to my mind. First is conducting a job grade analysis in a company. So the business problem could be, okay, are males and females being represented across all job grades in a uniform manner, or whether there is high representation of males in the higher job grades, and and females in the lower grades. So if we do that study and we find out that there's a bias, and that a certain gender is being represented very strongly in higher job grades, then you need to then go back and to the recruitment process, and probably include a learning training program for the recruiters, for the line managers, for those specific job roles. Similar Another case study could be linking the recruitment process with performance. So for example, in Australia we have recruitment channels like Seek, LinkedIn. We could then take those data of applicants applying for jobs from these recruitment channels, and then find out which recruitment channel is more effective, because then we could see that whether the employee or the applicant hired, how well they have performed in the company, for how long. And so then you can tag that data into the channel, and then you can assess which recruitment channel is producing better results. There are another one on recruitment could be on onboarding. So let's say in one of my previous companies, I had when I joined, I was put into a 1 day onboarding program, where I go through all the company's values, and all the trainings, mandatory trainings. In the COVID area, I know a lot of companies would be already doing a virtual onboarding program. And it will be fascinating to see that a 2 hour or a 3 hour virtual onboarding program what's the results for that program. So how what is the performance of the new hires once they have undertaken this onboarding virtual onboarding program, how long they have stayed in the company after that, and you can then compare it with the face-to-face program that the company used to run in the past to match up that whether the virtual program is much more effective than the face to face. Because if we can prove it using data, then that could be a huge savings for the company.
It's so true, isn't it? I mean, Sam, but I feel like this is a topic that we could talk about for a very long time, and I agree, Jane. You can really see your passion in this space, Sam, and it's really inspiring, to be honest. I actually really enjoyed and was reflecting on your comments around the blind review and starting with the business problem. I think we explored that a little bit in our last vlog, actually, sort of, and that's been something that we've, I think is a real important piece to start with, but thinking about the blind review bit, I've seen all sorts of instances where through the right sort of technology, de-identifying the applicant, removing some of those points of bias so that, whether it be the line manager or the recruitment team, just don't have that sort of thing. They're looking at the application on its merits and assessing that. And I think, tying back that COVID-19 era, it's a tough time at the moment on so many fronts. But if we think about from a job perspective, previously, I'm a big believer of sometimes it's a lot easier to meet people in the flesh, even for the candidate to have that rapport. And it can be sometimes quite challenging in this era where so much of it is done via a Zoom call or other means. And so to be able to have some of these techniques or tools that are then integrated into the recruitment flow, I think would add a real lot of value to it. And you're absolutely right, Jane, the question that you asked with from a organization of, how do organizations do it? I don't think it always needs to be the big fancy broader system. I think, as you said, even just having a spreadsheet and a data set, that is something that could allow you to undertake a number of these sort of, studies and prove or disprove hypothesis, which is awesome. So, thank you guys. That was a terrific discussion. And I think it was a really, hopefully, something that all of us can reflect on and hopefully our followers can get a lot out of as well. So maybe that's that, and it's a bit of a wrap. And until the next time. So with that in mind, have a great week, everyone. Stay safe, and until the next time. Bye for now.